Unipod, the podcast for all things management software.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unipod, the podcast for all things management software. And today we are with Olivia Ribin-Zank, right? Did I pronounce that? Great.
You did.
Okay, amazing. And I'm really excited to start this episode. So let's just go ahead. I'll give you the stage right away, Olivia, to introduce yourself and tell our listeners how you got into the management software world.
Great to be here. Thanks. Yeah, so I started my own company first for about 10 years ago, which I had for a few years. It was a FinTech company, crashed and burned during the COVID pandemic. I think we were one of the many. Yeah, it was a bloodbath in the early days, I think. But
yeah, you were not alone, definitely.
No, definitely not alone. It was a collective exit in the good way. But after that, I joined a management software company initially as a product manager, but then for the last couple of years, I've been running their payments in their M&A function as well. So that's kind of how I got into it through a bit of a change in circumstances, but it's been great, and here we are.
Cool. And did your fintech and payments experience influence the fact that you joined this management software company? And I think it would also be interesting to hear, like, where was this management software company at in this stage where they thought they should hire someone that is, a payment expert, let's call it.
Yeah. So my own company closed down just as we were raising our Series A round, and sort of we just gotten traction and it was really gearing up for growth. So when I had to close that down, I was looking for companies that had made it through that stage and were through to sort of a larger growth, if you will. So this company they were still small at that time. They were maybe some 40 people when I joined, but growing very fast and was just closing a big capital raise to continue their growth. And that was a journey that I wanted to be on since I didn't have the chance to do it in my own company. So, and at the time, they were also at a place where they were looking for more sort of deep area experts on different topics. So, of course, in the beginning of a company's journey, you need people that can do everything, generalists, but then as you grow, you need more specialized people. So I was brought in specifically to improve their finance and payments functions overall. And then over time, I sort of narrowed my responsibilities as the company grew and we got more people in so that I was only looking at the payments.
Interesting. And like, what was there any payments or fintech infrastructure already in the management software company when you joined, or was it something that completely new that you brought into the company?
It was there already. It had been launched a few years before. It had not been a great commercial success because they didn't really know what they were doing. I mean, I think the founders of the company had the foresight to say that there's a big business opportunity in the embedded payments the product, but they didn't have the knowledge to really take it further than that. So they had launched the product, but then it was kind of sitting there on the side. There was also a lot of concern about the risk profile of the product and how to manage that, which led them to be very cautious. And I think having someone like me in place then also enabled them to sort of feel more comfortable and actually put some investment behind the product to make it really shine and take it across the portfolio.
Okay, cool. That's interesting because a lot of the times I hear founders or companies in general intimidated by payments. And here you say it was kind of clear that there is some potential in it, but it needed more attention. Am I getting that right?
Exactly. I think many other features tend to sell themselves more easily, but the payments product is something that it does require deeper understanding. It does get very technical very quickly, and that can be, as you say, intimidating to some people. And also, of course, the comfort that we are not exposing the company to undue risk when all of a sudden you have a processing volume that is several multiples the company's revenue. You want to make sure that you've taken your precautions.
Okay, cool. So since you really come from this payment background, I'd really like to dive deeper into this topic on this episode and ask you, like, you said it was embedded payments. So was it embedded from the start, or because usually in the life cycle of a management software, they start with an third-party integration API calls between them, and then they go into the stage of embedded. So was it similar here, or was it straight for embedded? And maybe you can also actually start from like explaining the difference between the API integrations and embedded, and that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe I should also introduce the company a bit. So it's a family. It's a nursery management software. So this is a management software and a platform for kindergartens, preschools, childminders, what have you, anyone taking care of pre-primary age children. We're in a handful of different markets, and sort of the product is different in different spaces because of the nature of the business that we're serving. So, and I think that's one of the things with many vertical management softwares is that you end up with different products in different markets just because of local customs and regulations and so on. And nursery management is definitely no exception to that, where in the Scandinavian markets and in the German markets, we see the public sector playing a lot bigger role where there's not so much payment directly from parents, whereas in UK, US, you see that the vast majority of the payment for the childcare services is by parents, which means that there is much larger sums of money that the nurseries or the centers have to take care of themselves. And those are the payments that we would intermediate for them and would process. So we actually went straight to an embedded payment service. So initially, as you mentioned, what many companies do is these API services where it's you wouldn't see the payments directly in the management software. You would have it coming from your bank account. You would know the payments are there. You might be able to push payments to a third party that will then process them, and you would get a report at the end, but you wouldn't have the sort of tight coupling within the software itself. And that tight coupling was what we wanted from the beginning. So that has always been there in family. And essentially that means that at any point in time, as a manager, I can go in and I can look at a specific invoice or a specific customer. I can see their full payment history. I can query about different the status of different payments directly from within the management software. I don't need to go elsewhere for that. I also don't need to then have access to a separate software and learn to navigate something else. All of that is handled by family behind the scenes.
Yeah, okay. So I think this is an important part to stress about the embedded integration, that it really lets the user experience all the payment flows inside the platform. He is not redirected to a third party and has to onboard and integrate and open an account and remember his credentials and use their support team and all that. It's really everything within the platform. But then, okay, so this sounds amazing, but then there should be some cons to it, right? I mean,
yeah, no, of course. It's it puts more pressure on your development team for sure. It also means that you take a bigger, I mean, doing it this way, you can take a higher margin than what you would otherwise do. So it offers a greater revenue potential, of course. But on the flip side of that, you're also then sort of, as you say, you don't rely on the payment provider's support team. So if anything goes wrong, and things do go wrong in payments every now and then, something doesn't happen, something is not updated correctly, and then you need to investigate and get back to the customer and find out what happened here. If a payment was disputed, you need to be involved in those disputes. You need to ensure the right documentation has been submitted and so on. And of course, what we found in particular is that disputes are that's always an unpleasant process to be part of, and that's not good for the customer relationship to be involved in those things. And actually, we saw very early on that this was something that that's one area where we do want to have direct access to the payment provider, because both it's more technical. Why was my dispute? Why was my evidence not accepted? Why are they still charging me the money? What's the reason for this? How can they do that? Those are often questions that we were dealing a lot with SMB businesses as well. I think if you're dealing with more enterprise customers, that's probably more educated user sitting on the other side. But in the SMB world, you're dealing with owner managers who very often don't understand why disputes can happen, and sort of that can be bit of a complicated process to intermediate, and can put a lot of strain on the business relation, the customer relationship that you have. So that's one of the cons. Another one is also just the complexity of it. It's as much as many providers have done an excellent job, and especially in the last decade or so, in making the integration seamless. It is technical work, and you really need to have a strong engineering team to be able to do it correctly, because as we would always say, is that you can't have bugs in your payment service. I mean, sure, if other parts of the ERP, the customer might be more forgiving if there's there's a glitch and they need to reload the page, or if it's if there's an email that bounces, or you have whatever, right? People are more forgiving with those things. But if the money doesn't show up the way they want it to, you don't get many strikes until they look for a different provider, right? So you really need a very high standard and very, very strong QA functions as well. And of course, when you have that integration, the API system, you don't need that as much, because then they can go and they can see in the other software, oh, this actually wasn't sent, or this is what's going on, and they can sort of, it's a simpler system for the company to understand, if you will. Whereas with an embedded service, then it's your brand, it's your relationship with the customer that's really hold up everything, and that's a lot of work, and it does require very high standards.
So it's also your name on the table, your brand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense, right? I mean, you know it from yourself. If you go somewhere and you put in your card details and something goes wrong, as a consumer, you would never trust that website again. Even if it might be an accident, or it's just a bug, or then everything was sorted, you got your money back and everything was fine, you would never trust them with your credit card details again, would you? Right? So it's that kind of sentiments you're up against.
Yeah, of course. Money and trust, I think, goes together hand in hand, and every consumer on the planet can absolutely relate with that. So for our listeners, or for our management software listeners that want to explore payments on their management software platform, and without going into names of payment providers, like, what are the things that you should look for when searching a payment provider, and what do you need to stay away of? For example, like, what needs to be in your mind in the process of looking at payment?
We would start by looking at their APIs and the documentation, and sort of seeing that the developer experience needs to be really good, because it is, as mentioned before, it is very technical, it's very complicated, and if you need to rely on the payment provider's support team or solution architects to help you out all the time, it's going to take a lot longer than if you have self-serve documentation and just an easier technical setup to understand. Secondly, I would look for a provider that has a lot of embedded components that you can use. So there are certain functions, certain views that you always want to have in your management software. You want to have a list of payments. You want to have a payment detail input form. That these things come out of the box, that you can embed directly in your software. Saves you a lot of time. You don't need to build everything from scratch if there's all these components that you can rely on. So again, the developer experience and the speed to market is really important. Sorry.
Maybe you can explain a bit more for our listeners, like, what is a component, and what is a component?
Yeah, so a component is a reusable piece of code that you can in the UI, that you can in the interface of the software, that you can take from elsewhere. So I think at the simplest level, you can think of it as a button in your software. You want that button to look consistent everywhere, so that's why you would use a component for it. It will save you time, so you don't need to create the button from scratch every time. But also you can make sure that the way you style it and the way the user interacts with it is consistent everywhere in the platform. So that's sort of the smallest level of a component. When we're talking about embedded payment services, then components would be larger pieces, it would be larger frames, if you will. Like, I think that the best example is probably the input form for your payment details. We all know it from our e-commerce shopping experiences, right? In the last page in the checkout, you go and you enter your card details. That's a standardized form that is used across many different online purchasing experiences, and you want that to be consistent. And it's a base flow. The checkout flow is a commonality in every online payment experience that you have, every digital payment experience. So therefore, there's no need to build it yourself. And instead, I would rely here on the payment provider, because also once you're dealing with payment data, and the payment details data in particular, then there's a lot of compliance you need to be aware of course, the security of these payment details. And instead of having to do all that yourself, we would always use embedded components wherever we can, so that all of that information we know it's taken care of, we know it's certified, we know it's PCI compliance. It's the I forget what it stands for. It's the standard around the payment details, how you handle it. And because
High
if you don't,
standards.
yes, exactly, card standards, exactly. Because if you don't rely on embedded components in these situations, you need to get certified yourself, because then you're actually handling card details, and that's just an unnecessary headache. So by being able to work with a partner that has all of these things set up already, save yourself a lot of headache, a lot of development time, also a lot of your in-house legal team will be. Yeah, so those are two things. Other things that I would also look for are, of course, the support experience. What access do you have in terms of internally? Because there will be individual payments that needs following up on. Something doesn't look the way it's supposed to. What happened here? Why was this party payment declined? All of these things. Both how much of that is self-serve, but also how much what's the ease of access to query on individual payments? Because once you start dealing with payments on behalf of your customers, you need to have that level of information readily available, so that you can have the response time that you want to have, and not then need to wait 48 hours for another team to get back to you before you can get back to your customer. And that's not the experience that you would want to give. Yeah, those are the main things. I think, of course, the basics I would assume any payment provider worth their salt in terms of reliability, uptime, what have you. But that's sort of, I would assume that's a given with any major payment provider.
Yeah, okay. But, the main points that I take from your summary here are the API and development knowledge that this company has, then the amount and variety of components, right? So the experience of the user can be very smooth, and support, because with payments, it's not something that you can play with or you can take risk on. You really need this relationship to be stable and to be sure you can trust this partner.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So one thing to mention on top of that as well, is the risk tools as well. Depending on the nature of them. So with management software, I would think the risk profile is not the highest when it comes to online payments. So for instance, an e-commerce would have a much higher risk profile. But for most management softwares, it's obviously still something you need to think about. So what are the risk tools that are available? How smart are they? Are they relying on machine learning? Are they starting to leverage AI in these situations? And what are the triggers that, what automated triggers can you put in place so that as soon as something fraudulent is detected, what tools do you have to block it, to flag it, to report on it, to act on it, and sort of what's the tools that's available there? Because fraud is a given, that's going to happen, and it's just about how do you have the tools and the knowledge to respond when it does.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you really need this trust element with the partner that you are going to do this whole project with. Yeah, that makes sense. And now, once you already have this payments integrated, working successfully in your platform, and then you come and you want to optimize the revenue that the payments is generating for your company, right? So how do you approach that? What do you recommend for optimizing the revenue from payments? And maybe the first question should be, do you see it as a major contributor to the company's bottom line revenue? Because many management softwares operate with no payments at all, or no embedded payments, that's for sure. So do you see this as something that really contributes to the stickiness and the revenue of the platform? And then how do you increase it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the sector and the vertical that you're in, but I would always see it as a significant revenue contributor, and it's always something that I would go for can't really think of a situation where it wouldn't make sense. Both of course, they might exist, but essentially you can think of it in two ways. Are you able to offer the payments product as a standalone service, or will it always be part of part of the usage of the platform? Some companies that might have a freemium model, they might just make money on the payments revenue and then say, fine, you can have the software for free, at least the base tier of it, but use our payment services instead. I know of several companies who've gone down that revenue route, where essentially ease of access onto the platform, they support the customers and so on without getting any or very little revenue from the software itself, but then the payments is where they make their money. So it's absolutely something that can be, in many cases, larger than the revenue that you get from your subscriptions.
Wow.
And
so for example, so for the companies that are listening now that don't have payments at all, they can imagine like doubling their revenue, or at least their income from just adding this payment feature into their software.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That is the potential. Of course, again, it depends on the sector. And I would say here you need to be in a sector where the majority of your customers' payments are card payments. That's really where it is interesting. So family is a bit of an outlier in that sense. The majority of our payments are bank-to-bank payments where the margins are just much lower. So in that sense, like as I said before, there are cases where it's less attractive than in other cases. I was at some point working with a company where it was a management software for vehicle mechanics, like for auto shops. All of their payments are card payments because the customer takes their car into the shop, gets it repaired, make a card payment at the end. So that's a very lucrative business. The nursery management, where it's a monthly payment, you set up a ACH or a direct debit or a bank-to-bank transfer, that's less interesting. It's still very interesting. I would not talk it down, but sort of it can get much more interesting. So especially if you're in a business where you're servicing customers that are taking card payments, I would 100% go for it. It is very, very attractive in those cases. And then you can either think of it, as I said, in two ways, either sort of as a standalone service where really the payments is what you monetize, and then the software is either free or very cheap. Or you can have it as a cross-sell motion so that you have your existing sales process to get customers on board, your go-to-market, whatever you have today, and then you have a second line of cross-selling where it's either upsell or cross-sell depending on how your business is organized to get that payment adoption going on. And what we will see here is that typically you might be able to hit some 50% of your customers signing up to payments when they join the platform, but then over time you should be able to increase that to some 75-80% of your customers by having the secondary cross-selling, upselling motion afterwards. And again, that depends on how your company is organized. That can either be that it's the same customer support, customer success agents that will handle upgrades, renewals, that will also then handle the payment sale. It does require a strong team because payments is technical, and there's a lot of, you can imagine if the founders are intimidated by payments, average customer success agent will be even more intimidated by it. So but if you have a strong team, I would absolutely go for that model. Or you can have a specialist within like a payment sales person that is then sitting there and like repeatedly targeting existing customers in a cross-sell motion. That sort of is easier, but of course, that introduces a different kind of friction. That is a new person reaching out that the customer is not familiar with and what have you. So those are kind of the two models that I've seen.
Okay, that's super interesting. And it sounds like, I don't know about the numbers for every company, but let's say this like 50% that you say sign up for payments once they onboard to the platform, there is still some optimization work that you can do in order to get these 70, 80, 90% of customers using your payment services and your embedded payment services. I think some of the listeners here do have some payments already integrated on their software, and it would be interesting to like learn, or from your experience, what are the best ways to increase the adoption of the payment features, how important it is to have a trained team, or is it enough to have like one expert in the field? How do you bring the knowledge to the company and then to the customers? And like, is it enough? Let's maybe even like go further and talk about the channels, because some features can be sold via email or even an ad on LinkedIn. But I think that payments need like a different treatment in that sense. So that would be like interesting.
Yeah, and I think again it depends on your customer base. We see that for larger customers, they intuitively understand the need for a embedded payment provider and to have everything. If you're already dealing with their ledgers in terms of like, is your software where they go to see the status of each of their customers, then they intuitively understand it because they won't have everything in one place. That sort of embedded proposition is extremely strong. Being able to drill down into a specific customer, understand these are their outgoings, these are the ingoings, this is where they're at, was the payment successful, do I have payment details on hold, hand my debtors report, I can filter it and query it, I can send reminders based on payment status and so on. Have they signed up for an automatic payment or not? Those details are save so much time for a sort of a larger enterprise customer finance team. If you're dealing with SMBs, on the other hand, it's a bit of a harder sell. The automation and the embeddedness is not so intuitive because, again, you're dealing with someone who's not a professional in their field. It's typically the owner manager that is also handling payments and all the finances, and they might not necessarily see it. And for them, it's much more a case of convenience. It's a case of trust. It's a case of selling time back. What we often found was the most effective in those situations was focusing on, well, how much time are you spending right now? What could you do with that time instead? Because the SMB owner is chronically short on time. And if you can give them even a couple of hours a week back, it's typically a good sale for them. So that's more the time element. And also sitting there and entering payments is not something that, I mean, you don't typically tend to open a business because you enjoy sitting and entering payments all day. So it's not work that they enjoy doing. So they're happy to get that automated for them, right? So there's that element to it. But the trust is extremely important, especially when you're dealing with the SMB customer that doesn't understand that much technicality of what they're even looking at. What does it mean? So being able to have both the customer rep that's leading this conversation, have them feel confident and knowledgeable, and being able to get back up whenever there's more technical questions is extremely important because it's very much a trust sell. But also having that the experience in the software needs to be intuitive. It needs to be easy to understand, easy to navigate, easy to get an overview, easy to understand the details of each individual payment, so that you feel as a business owner that you can always understand what's going on. Because in very many cases, what you're competing against is a bank transfer, maybe a card terminal, where then they get a report at the end of the day or the end of the week or something, and having that sort of similar experience within the software that they can easily see what's going on is extremely important. And then lastly, I would also say that the social proof is going to be very important. So if you have some reference customers, you have some customer stories, especially people that are influential in the community, if there are certain business leaders in the local area that are they don't even need to use your software, but as long as they use a software with an embedded payments in it, is something that goes a long way. Because especially again with the SMB customer that needs that convincing, that trust that this is safe for them to do, and they're not going to now risk all of their turnover going into some black hole, because that's really the fear that you're up against. It's like, what happens if it goes wrong? If a bank-to-bank transfer, I can understand that. A card terminal that I got from my bank, I can understand that. It goes into my bank account. But now I'm doing it through your software. Now, where does the money go? What's the timelines? How long does it take? All of these things. You need that social proof and that comfort given to the customer. And that's where we found that, at least in the beginning of this journey, having an in-house expert, so one payment AE or a customer success manager that specializes in this area, is typically a good way to go, so that you really invest heavily in this one person and then have them disseminate knowledge across the organization. And then over time, you would hope that the entire team would then upskill and absorb this knowledge. But again, that depends on the strength of the team and what other tasks they're used to handling. Because if they're just answering support tickets, it's going to be very hard to get them to feel comfortable with the payment sales. But if they're already used to handling renewals, upgrades, more complicated setup questions, and otherwise provide a more in-depth support experience and success experience for the customers. They have those strong relationships already. Absolutely, they're the best place to make those sales, but it does require that they can get the confidence. Of course, then you need to have an in-house training. You need to make sure that your legal team is involved, that everything that is being said is actually correct, because at the end of the day, it's sort of, it is people's turnover that you're touching, and that does just require that people feel confident in all parts of the business, that they're providing correct information, but also that they can back up what they're saying to the customer.
Okay. Really like, all the tips that you gave us here about having like one person educating the organization and using that trust and the relationship from the teams that they already have to leverage the relationship with the customers. But what I also really liked that you said is that there's a difference between the sales here with SMBs and enterprise, because I think it's an important thing to stress here in the sense that enterprise is enterprise. They will probably already have their certain taste and what they want and know that what they need or what's the next step they're looking for. And the real opportunity probably lies within the SMBs that needs also this education and needs you to take them hand in hand, explain to them about the opportunity and how it can help them grow their business. And so this is something I really like because it can help you focus probably a bit better where to put where to invest, I think. What do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's a very different sales process. I mean, with enterprise, you're typically replacing an existing software. They probably have a solution already for payments. Very few enterprises don't have that. Whereas with an SMB, you're most likely taking them off pen and paper, depending on the sector, of course. But it's more likely to be, bank transfers and a card terminal that you're up against. So that's also a very different sales process just from the get-go. I mean, what are you replacing? What's their status quo? And as you said, like with enterprises, you're
so
dealing
it's
with
probably
people
even earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's an earlier part in their journey, and it's also, as you said, an enterprise team will be familiar with different solutions in the market. They know what they like. They've worked perhaps with a few different solutions before, so they're a much more informed buyer. So it's also just by that, it's a very different conversation.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about churn of the software and how do you see the stickiness of payments affecting churn? And is there a way to measure how payments affect the negativity of churn or the positivity of revenue that we already kind of discussed?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky one because you're going to have a certain amount of selection bias that the customers that choose to use your embedded payments are your more loyal customers already because they're willing to go further into your product and further use all of your services and sort of because once you start using something for how you take payments, it's also how you present yourself to your customers. And so you're going to have some selection bias and who are the ones that are comfortable doing that. If you're already feeling a bit, I've got one foot out the door, maybe I'm going to churn this platform. I'm not going to now start using their payment service. So it's a tricky one to measure. Right. I mean, we definitely see a huge difference in terms of churn using payments and if they're not using payments. But again, you're not comparing apples to apples, so that can be really tricky. We have had very good success with customers who have had issues or who have been unhappy with the payment services, like the finance part of our platform, so the invoicing and accounting side of it. That once they layer in the payments, they tend to get happier because then they have that full suite, everything from invoice generation to account statements, general ledgers, all of these things, payments, reconciliation, debtors report. Once you have all of those things in one place, that does tend to increase customer satisfaction as well. So there's also an element of being that true all-in-one service that you can provide that full life cycle of revenue creation and collection and reconciliation at the end. So that has a positive effect.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because that makes me think that once you have payment features, it makes more people in the business use the software, which means you have more users that are using the software. And I don't know how you can measure it and if you can measure it, but I guess it contributes to the stickiness of your software. Once you have all hands in software and they all like it and are familiar with it and the accountants know what they're paying for, then it's probably an easier, smoother experience within the organizations.
Absolutely.
That's one more thing that payments, I guess, can help you achieving with your software. Okay, so what is your advice for management software founders that are listening now and want to scale their business? It can be about payments, but it can also be a general advice that you would like to share from your experience with nursery management software, or it sounded like you had other experience with management software before.
General advice, I see. I think it's tricky. I think the management software, it's hard to say sector or industry because you're more closely to the vertical that you're servicing than to being a management software on your own, right? Comes in so many different shapes and sizes. Yeah. there's sort of two competing poles, if you will. On the one hand, you want to have a feature set that you're really happy with and sort of therefore go deep into certain areas of the platform and be able to provide an experience you can be proud of and a good customer journey in those certain areas. On the other hand, unless you have the full suite of what the customer needs, it's hard to really position yourself well in the market. So those are sort of the two competing trends, and it just takes time. What I found is that it's a successful strategy can be to take one feature that's and then do that really, really well. So you're known for, like, for instance, in Family's case, I mean, they started out being just a communication platform for the nurseries to communicate with the parents of the children that go there. And they got really good at that communication side. And that's all they did. And then after that, they started branching into other parts of the management software. So that being like, the finance part and the staffing planning and all these other things. But to this day, what's called the parent engagement, so the communication platform, is really the strong part of the platform. And that's a good combination where you have one thing that you're really known for, this is what you do well. It also helps if that's the tool that your customers use to communicate to their customers. So therefore you have then the customers of the customers of your customer as advocates for your product. That's something that in Family we've seen has been very successful, where if a nursery has wanted to churn the platform or has been unhappy about something, the parents of the children that go there are saying, no, don't you dare get rid of this app. We really like it. We want to stay this way. We don't want to go to some other provider. So if you can really recruit the end customer here, because you're dealing with businesses, right? It's a B2B, if you can recruit the end customers somehow using your service as well, then you're in a very strong position. And that will also give you a lot of leeway from not being as deep in the other areas, because you cannot go deep everywhere. You need to prioritize. You cannot be a 5-star experience across all of the different functions. So pick one, get really known for that, and then have everything else good enough. And then over time you can improve, of course. But of course the world also doesn't stand still. So there's new expectations that are coming up constantly. So it's hard to be that 5-star experience everywhere.
Wow. Okay. Perfect. I mean, first of all, it's a management software podcast for different verticals. So it's nice that you have this view that can generalize the advice in that sense, because what you said about the feature is relevant for every single management software. Like, pick one, because all-in-one platforms want to do everything, and you want to be able to serve your customers on every single angle that they need and replace all the different tools that they're using today. Getting known exclusively for one specific feature and solving a really specific problem that your users already have is something that is relevant for every single management software. And I think that the two pools that you talked about is relevant for all of them. So that's a good point. And then also having this, I forgot what I wanted to say. Never mind, probably wasn't too important. Yeah, so I think for the management software part, we have it fully covered. I think we have already like a lot of information, and it was super interesting. And I think this is a very, feature focused on payments episode that can be useful for a lot of our listeners. So thank you for your previous experience here. And if you want, I mean, I didn't plan to do that, but if you want to tell our listeners, like, how did you evolve from the management software field and what keeps you busy today, then I think this is a nice platform to like share how you evolved from there. So you can go for it if you like.
I can say a few words about that. I think so the world of management software, as I mentioned before, like it's so different in different areas. Like, it really depends what vertical the software is supposed to service. The specifics of the customers are very different depending on the sector. That also means that as someone who's in that area, that there's a lot of opportunities for trying out different things. You can sort of have a lot of experience. There's a lot of things that are transferable, a lot of things that you can rely on previous experience for. But at the same time, there's always a lot of opportunities to try something completely different. Even when you think about, I mean, if you're sitting on the product side, for instance, I mean, are you talking about the embedded payments, the finance, the more sort of accounting side of the platform, or are you talking about a communication side or a staff planning? These are completely different softwares, and you have softwares that all they do is staff planning, all they do is accounting, right? So you can really sort of get a chance to taste a lot of different areas of a business and get to know the drivers, the important things, the operations behind a lot of different parts of a business. So in that sense, I think similar to management consulting, working in management software, it allows you to get that sort of very broad overview of all the things that goes on in a business. And that makes it super interesting. It's a lot of different things that you can try out, you can sample, you can see what you like, what kind of problems are you more interested in solving before sort of making any decisions, or maybe you just continue doing a few years here, a few years there, and so on. There's definitely enough to keep you engaged for a very long time. I think if you're on the commercial side, it's probably more specific to the vertical that you're in because you're closer to the customer there. So you probably have less of this exposure to all the different parts of the business, also because certain parts of the platform are more likely to generate support questions than others. And also in the sales process, certain parts are more likely to come up than others. So you might feel more comfortable in one area than another. But there's definitely a good chance to get that broad exposure and keep sort of sampling different types of software, if you will, without needing to change jobs.
Perfect. Amazing. You basically could do anything within the management. It's such a big world. You can basically do anything. Okay.
It is.
Olivia, thank you. It was a wonderful episode. I'm going to stop